Aloha! Aloha, good morning. Good morning, everybody. So nice to see so many happy, smiley faces. And haven't seen a lot of you in a long time, but it's good to see everybody out there in the crowd. And what a crowd we have this morning. So welcome everybody to our first annual Wailea Realty, Windermere, Maui Real Estate Economic Summit. Took me all night to remember that one. My name is Brad MacArthur, and along with my partner Tom Tezak, we are so excited to welcome you all to such an exciting day. We've got some terrific speakers. You'll find them to be very engaging, very entertaining, very informative. Tom and I have had the pleasure of seeing Matthew Gardner speak at several events back on the mainland. And then also Paul Brubaker, no name here in Hawaii, and obviously a big crowd drawer, so welcome. Just a couple of things. Wailea Realty has been here since 1972. We were the first real estate company here in the Wailea Resort, and we've got a long history here. But recently, we've made our affiliation with Windermere Real Estate, and it's created so many great opportunities for us as a company and gives us so many different avenues to reach out to our clients and to our customers. And this event today is just one of several sort of reasons that we've affiliated with Windermere. And we know it brings value to our clients, our customers, and to our agents, and helps us all better in the real estate industry. So just wanted to mention that. Thank you. Before we get started with our program, we'd like to recognize a couple of key people that are here today. From the Office of Mayor Mike Victorino, we have Representative Chief of Staff Deidre Teagarden. We also have from the WCA, Wailea Community Association, Bud Picrone. Bud. And Kathy Costello. Kathy, thank you for making it. And from the Realtors Association of Maui, we have David Ballou and Jason Economo. Thank you for being here. Tom has a few introductions he'd like to make as well.
Aloha, everybody. Thank you so much. Thanks for the folks who got here a little bit late and during the traffic jam. We really appreciate that y'all waited to get in. We hope you appreciate and enjoy the event. I'd like to also thank and welcome from our Windermere corporate office, the owners, Jill and Jeff Wood are here with us, as well as the COO, Brooks Barton. Brooks will be up here to also introduce our economist, Matthew Gardner, Paul Brubaker, as well as our co-sponsor of the event, Title Guarantee, and Sam Chillingworth. So we're really excited to have all of you here for this event. They spoke yesterday on the Big Island, and we've been hearing rave reviews, so we're going to hold them to that standard today. Also, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Wells Fargo, who's in the back. They've also been gracious to sponsor with Dan Bardenhagen, one of their local reps. And acknowledge also the hard work of all of our staff at Wailea Realty who put this together. It is not an easy task to do to create this event and make it all happen as hopefully smooth and seamless as it has gone. So thanks so much for that. We really do appreciate it. And lastly, I would like to ask you, as a respect and courtesy to our speakers, if you could take this moment to silence your cell phones. And one other thing, there have been a couple tickets, valet tickets that have been found. I know there's one sitting over on the table over there, and somebody else has one in the room. So if you don't have it, we've got them somewhere. So thanks so much. Brooks, if you could come on up. Sure.
How about another round of applause for these guys for putting this event together? So I have the pleasure today of introducing our speakers, and I must admit the first speaker I'm going to introduce, who's going to provide some thoughts and insights on your local market, I've known for all of about 8 minutes. So I'm going to do my best, Sam. Sam's responsibilities here include overseeing the daily operations of the TG sales team. That would be Title Guarantee of Hawaii, where he's sales director. And driving TG's strategy for continued growth through development of innovative products and superior customer service. My understanding is he provides that to you all day in and day out here on the island. Beyond the world of real estate, Sam likes to spend time with his family and enjoys water sports, woodworking, and music. So with that, no further ado, warm welcome for Sam Chillingsworth.
All right. Good morning, everyone. So first things first, I wanted to really thank Windermere and all the folks that put on an event like this. Putting on events like this are not easy. Getting you all in the room are not easy. And on behalf of Title Guarantee, I'm really thankful to be a part of this amazing event. And moving forward today, I'll give you a little insight into the Maui market over the last 3 years. But truth be told, I wasn't supposed to be here today. Mike Peach, who's the president and COO of Title Guarantee, was scheduled to give this talk, and I got a call yesterday morning saying, I need you to be on the first flight tomorrow morning to Maui to give a talk. Sound fun? So, with that in mind, I'll ask for a little bit extra aloha this morning, and I'll do the best I can to get through what we need to get through, and hopefully you'll take some aha moments away in this Maui market. Okay? So, it's always a great place to start when you can look backwards and see where we've been. Matthew and Paul will definitely talk about where we've been from the rate standpoint, but it's always good to just see the road we've traveled and remember that the road we're on now is actually a pretty tremendous one. You know, the dip in rates in the last few weeks has really been a shot in the arm for the refi market and also the resale market, and I think it's posing us to be really in a great position for the rest of 2019. Paul and Matt will talk more about that, I'm sure. When you look at the overall Maui market, I've broken it down by two categories. Real estate less than $3 million, and we're going to term luxury real estate for anything over $3 million. And you can see in this graph on the left, when you look at 2016 to 2017, we had a huge 30% growth on Maui, and then an additional 5% over the last year, positioning us from 2019 in a really positive way. If you look at the unit count at 2,300 or so in 2016 and up to almost 3,200 last year, Maui is booming, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as these slides unfold. So let's look at cash versus sale with mortgage. Again, the two categories here are $3 million and less and $3 million and over. When you look at the cash-only game in the $3 million and under market, there's a slight dip in 2018. So, whoops. This is 2016, 2017, 2018. Cash-only buyers in that segment came down, and then sale with mortgage sort of followed the same trajectory as the rest of the market. But what's interesting is when you look at the $3 million and over category, and you look at the cash buyers, and you compare that with the sale of the mortgage, the crucial takeaway message is that cash is king on Maui. And the people that have the stash are spending the cash. Okay, so for what that means to you, and I'm certainly not Paul or Matthew, and I won't pretend to be, but what that should mean to you from the sales side, which is the side that I know best, is that when you're prospecting for your clients, understanding the demographic that we'll continue to go through is going to be crucial moving forward. And if you're not in front of them in a new and innovative way, you're going to be left behind. Owner versus investor. So under the $3 million and less category, homeowner versus investor, kind of pretty stable, following the similar trajectory of the rest of the market. Investor is virtually flat in the $3 million category. And then up above $3 million, you're seeing a huge spike in homeowner designations and a drop in investor. What does that mean to all of you? I'm not really sure. You're the experts, not me. But what it tells me, or what you might infer from that, is that either the investors are playing a better game here on Maui, and they're getting the homeowner designation a little bit easier, or the people that are coming to Maui are choosing to call Maui home. And that should play into the way that you approach people on the sales side as well. Make sense so far? This is just a summary slide, overall tax bracket, or overall market by tax class. You can see how the breakdown of real estate transpires for the island of Maui. Over 7,000 units on the residential side. Agriculture makes up a little bit over 1,100 units, commercial just over 300, and then the hotel and resort market. So the resale residential market is surely where the business is to be had on Maui, as I'm sure many of you know already. Overall market rent by transaction type, you can see that we put A and B on here because they're such a dominant landowner on Maui, also REO, and the resale market that had a small downtick at the end of 2018. You see here. But the first sale market, when you look over the last 3 years, when you're looking at 16, 17, and 18, what you can take away from that is the developers are looking at Maui even more than ever before. And they have their eyes on Maui property in a new and bigger way. And so what do those projects look like over the last few years? These are the top 20 first sale projects that happened over the last 3 years. At the top of the list is Kamalani, which you can see has a total of, 126 units. This is a heat map, so the hot ones are the ones that are hot, and the green ones are the ones that are not so hot. Number 2 is Kamani at Kehalani. I notice there's lots of lani on Maui. Everyone's in the heavens. But when you look at that, so both of those projects, up over 100 units, that's significant, and landing about 50 million in sales proceeds. But then when you come down to the Kapalua Bay condo project with 25 units, that is, 119 million, just for context, right? The total unit count is landing about 50 million, and it'd be nice to sell 25 units and make 119 million. So I'll just leave that up for a second so you can see all the projects and what that first sale market is looking like on Maui currently over the last 3 years. Just by a show of hands, is anyone involved in any of these projects? Okay, a small handful. Top U.S. buyers, the local market still dominates on Maui. Hawaii buyers in 2018, you're looking at almost 2,200 units sold to Hawaii folks. But the California market is gaining ground. 2016 had 261, then 342, then 412. Washington's also moving up in the buyer count from 58 to 90, and then kind of leveling off at 95. This is just within the United States. We'll talk about foreign buyers in a second as well. But again, as you're prospecting and you're building your business and you're broadening your base, understanding who's buying and where they're from is going to be more significant than ever before. Top foreign buyers. In addition to Lani and the heavens over here, the Canadians love it too. So you can see pretty much the doubling of the amount of units that the Canadians are buying over the last 3 years, from 32 to 60, and what that might mean to you. Although I hear that Canadian conversation come up with agents quite often, and maybe that number isn't quite as high as you might think in this marketplace. The Japanese market on Maui is virtually nil, especially in comparison to Oahu, so that's an interesting takeaway. We are selling a lot more to the Japanese in the Oahu market than we tend to in the Maui market as well. And then when you're looking at the top 10 top neighborhoods, again, this is a heat map that is showing the hot zones in 3 million and under category up in Kihei and Wailuku, and then up country in number 3, and then no surprise, over 3 million in the luxury real estate market. Wailea, McKenna, and Kapalua are dominating that scale over the last 3 years as well. So, in short, cash purchases continue to gain momentum on properties over 3 mil. There's a positive outlook for 2019 with regard to the market here on Maui, and positioned very positively moving forward. And from a sales side of things, strategic and targeted prospecting are going to be more valuable than anything else. The shotgun approach to marketing to clients and the kind of spray and pray technique is coming to an end. And to understand the demographic of the buyers, to be able to get in front of them, whether it's on social media or some other way online, to get in front of the California buyers, the Canadian buyers, the folks from Washington, are really going to make or break the business that you're going to be doing on Maui. And then the last thing that I wanted to share with you before I end is something that's different from the stats and data that I was just sharing, but I think it's just as meaningful, and it comes more from my background than wanting to look at stats and figures like these gentlemen do. But it's really about the pursuit of happiness. And we've all chosen this venue of real estate to exercise that pursuit of happiness. And in my experience, the pursuit of happiness can be boiled down to really three things: something to do, someone to love, and something to look forward to. So thank you all for your aloha this morning. I look forward to working with you in the near future, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Sam. I believe you're a ninth generation Hawaiian. Is that right? Great job. So our next two speakers I had the pleasure of hearing yesterday. And let me just tell you, you're in for some entertainment along with a lot of great facts, both nationally and locally, around the economy. Our second speaker today is Paul Brubaker. It'll be our third. Paul's an economist and principal of TZ Economics, a consultancy involved in corporate work and litigation support here in Hawaii. He has studied the economy of Hawaii for over 25 years and previously served as senior vice president and chief economist of the Bank of Hawaii. He has lectured extensively in international monetary and financial economics. He is a member of the American Economic Association, the American Finance Association, and the National Association for Business Economics, for which he holds the Certified Business Economist designation. So Paul, we look forward to your comments. And our next speaker is someone that I've heard many times. We have the pleasure of Matthew Gardner being our chief economist at Windermere Real Estate. Matthew speaks some 70 times a year, so he is very polished at his presentation. Matthew is responsible for analyzing and interpreting economic data and its impact on the real estate market on both a local and national level. Matthew has over 28 years of professional experience, both in the U.S. and the U.K. In addition to his day-to-day responsibilities with Windermere, Matthew also sits on the Washington State Governor's Council of Economic Advisors, chairs the Board of Trustees at the Washington Center for Real Estate Research at the University of Washington, and is an advisory board member at the Runstad Center for Real Estate Studies at the University of Washington, where he also lectures on real estate economics. It's my great pleasure to introduce you, Matthew Gardner.
Wow, great introduction. Good morning. How are we? Well, first I'd like to thank you all for coming out to listen to a crusty old English economist wax poetic about the housing market and about the economy. And by the way, you can gather I'm not local. This is about as down market as I get dress-wise. But for you guys, I'm kind of known for my socks. So today I have sharks and surfers. So that's about as good as it gets. So what I plan to do today is to start at the big macro level, what's going on in the US economy, then what's going on in the US housing market, before handing it down to Paul to talk about the local market. I'd love to talk about it, but as you gather, I'm English, and he can pronounce your place names far better than I can. I mean, it wouldn't hurt you guys to put a consonant in some of your words once in a while. So, all right, so big picture. By a show of hands, who thinks the economy in the US, greater US, will be better rather this year than it was last year? Okay, well, those are the real estate brokers. I get that part. Who thinks it's going to be about the same? Okay, a few. Who thinks it's going to be worse? Oh, wow. We have some naysayers in the audience. Excellent. All right, so where do we stand today? We are in what I define as the Goldilocks zone. What is the Goldilocks zone, you ask? Well, it's an economy that's not too hot, not too cold, just about right. And that's where we are. 101 straight months of job growth. Quite a remarkable figure. We are right now at the second longest period of US economic expansion in modern history. Come the 1st of July, we'll be at the longest, and we will break that record. There's no doubt about it. So doing very well in that respect. Unemployment rate, it's stable at around 4%. It's 3.8 right now. Unlikely to go up, probably will drop down a notch or two through the course of this year. That essentially means if you want a job, you can find a job. And finally, we're actually seeing some income growth, something that we haven't seen actually in probably 20 years, but I'll talk about that a bit later on. There was a fourth bullet point I used to put on here, which was the fact the stock market was rising. And then I found out, depending on how many speeches I was giving and when, one day it was and one day it wasn't. I was giving a speech in San Francisco the day the Dow Jones dropped 1,000 points. And it was to a bunch of hedge fund managers and the guys at Berkshire Hathaway. They end up leaving halfway through to go to the bar. They came back though, that's a good part. But I was chatting to a guy at the end and he wasn't looking very happy. Like, well, what's up? I said, I lost $3 billion today. So if you think you've got problems, everything is relative, right? And it is. All right, so what do I see? As far as economic expansion, this is GDP, it's how we define growth and obviously recessions. When you have 2 negative quarters, it's a recession. We had 4 back in the day, therefore, the Great Recession. Now, are we going to keep on growing through the course of this year? I think we will, but the growth rate's going to be rather modest. And I will tell you one thing, it will not be the 4%, 5%, dare I say it, 6% GDP growth that people in Washington on the other side of the country think is possible. They say that, I say one thing, poppycock. Because I'm English and I can. Now, it's not going to happen. Now, we did have one quarter here where we broke 4%. So you can say, well, hang on, Gardner, we did it. There was a reason for that. Soybean sales. Now, I kid you not, soybean sales rose by 9,600% in the quarter. Why? To get ahead of trade tariffs with China, because China buys all our soybeans. So we can artificially that demand pulled forward. We are going to continue to grow through the course of this year, but it's probably going to come somewhere north of 2%, 2.1, 2.2 maybe. This first quarter number is going to be ugly. When it will get announced, and who knows when that's going to be, the government tends to shut down more frequently than it used to. But when they open back up again, we'll get that number. It's going to be pretty rough, but we are still growing. Now, this is the one slide that I don't want to show you, but I have to. And what does it mean? It means a lot to me. What is this? This is the, you might have heard the term inverted yield curve be mentioned over the course of the last couple of months. This, if you take the interest rate on 10-year treasuries, subtract 2-year, you have a number. The number should be positive. The further you go out along the yield curve, the higher the interest rate should be. That's changing. And we are right now about 0.14% from it going negative. Now, why is that important? Well, when that yield curve turns negative, we've got 9 to 18 months before we have a recession. And why do I know that? It's accurately forecast every recession in the last 60 years. So remarkable. Now, is it going to be a bad thing? No. Businesses running cycles. They always have, they always will. The US has had 49 recessions in its history. You're going to have 49 more. But it's going to look a lot like, well, very few of you here look old enough, like the 1991 recession. It'll be 2 negative quarters, the unemployment rate will rise, but not above 5.5%. It's a reset, and then we'll go forward. So just do be prepared that it is likely, although not guaranteed, that we'll see a business cycle turn down, probably sometimes toward the end of 2019. All right, that's the one bad thing. All the rest is all going to be unicorns and popcorn, so we're going to be in good shape. Jobs. We had about 2.7 million jobs last year. Very solid number. We will add probably slightly more than that this year before seeing a slowdown in 2020. So we're really in a situation which is fascinating. We continue to grow, and that employment number should be higher, but it's not. Why isn't it? Well, here's why. There's 7 million unfilled job openings in America today. 7 million. That's more job openings in the country than there are unemployed people. A very strange situation. And this says, could we grow? Yes, but we have a slowing down in terms of the labor force. The labor force is not expanding at the rate it should be. And because of that, a lot of companies need to grow, and they're having a hard time finding people to work for them. And so that's what's actually limiting employment growth, and it will do through the course of this year, but still a positive number. Now, we look at unemployment rate, everyone looks at the blue line, the 3.8% number. I don't, I'm a geek. I look at the red line. That's the real unemployment rate. It includes people that would like a job, but they're not actively looking for a job. And so that's running south of 7%. It's still a tad higher than I'd like to see it. But the trend, certainly from the recession, is coming down fairly dramatically. I expect we will probably end this year with a U3 number, the bottom line number, at around 3.6 to 3.7. That is full employment. If you want a job, without a doubt, you can find a job. We're not seeing inflation. And this is driving the Federal Reserve batty. It really is. They expect to see inflation kick in right now. And when they do that, which we're just not seeing it, which is kind of fascinating, it's unlikely we're going to see any kind of rapid rise in inflation, even given the trade wars and trade issues and tariffs that we're seeing right now. So it's very stable. But that is a problem for the Federal Reserve. Why is it a problem? They need to raise interest rates. Now, I know that people in that other Washington say, no, that's not right, but it is. And here's why. The most valuable tool the Fed has to counteract recessions, to help us recover, is lowering interest rates. Tough to do when you're at 2%. I know that. Japan tried for the lost decade of the 1990s. They just couldn't get rates up. So it's a big problem. Now, by the way, when you think about the Fed and the Fed funds rate, some people still think that when that rate rises, so do mortgage rates. It does not. There's a very loose association between the two. If you want to know what's going on with mortgage rates, track yields on 10-year treasuries. That will tell you all you need to know. So the Fed funds rate's going up, that's okay. It means the economy is doing well. It's important for it to go up, for then ultimately it to come back down again. Consumer confidence, consumer sentiment, we're feeling still a little bit better than we were, although we did see a fairly significant dip in December. Why? Well, the equity markets were certainly underperforming, and we also saw mortgage rates rise very precipitously in December. But we're still feeling pretty good, although there's a bit of caution coming into play now as well. Some people are saying, like I am, how long can this ride continue? Is it going to be a good place for the foreseeable future? And there's a problem with that. And the reason being is that if we're cautious, what do? We do nothing. We pretty much sit back and go, okay, let's just wait. And that's important for the economy, because 70% of our economy is us buying things. If we're not buying, the economy can't grow. We're still feeling pretty good. Now, there's another way of looking at it. My view, the Gardner Misery Index. Oh, no, it's a valid index. It really is. If you take the prevailing rate of inflation annualized and the unemployment rate, it gives you a number. The lower the number, the happier we should be. So I look at this and say, well, hang on, the last 3 years, low unemployment, low inflation. Why weren't we skipping down the streets? We should be. Now, you probably gather I'm not from around here. And one thing I learned very quickly when I came to America back in the early 90s is that if you're not shopping, you're not happy. It is so true. And we haven't been shopping. Why haven't we been shopping? Well, quite frankly, we haven't seen income growth. Adjusted for inflation, we were making as much money last year as we were making in 1998. 20 years of stagnant wage growth. Now, we certainly saw some fairly significant tax changes last year, with the view that if you reduce corporate tax rates, companies, out of the goodness of their hearts, are going to say, great, we'll increase wages. Poppycock. Didn't happen. It's a thing called trickle-down economics. Yeah, trickle-down anyway, whatever. No, it doesn't work. What we saw was increased dividends and stock buybacks. However, given the employment situation we've already gone through, companies need to keep on growing, they need to keep on expanding. So quite frankly, what I'm seeing, and I think it will continue, is that we are going to see palpable, real wage growth. It's the employees' turn now. Companies have done very well for a very long time. They need to keep on growing. You've got to pay the staff that you've got better. You need to attract new, good staff. You've got to pay them. And so because of that, I like looking at average hourly wages. It's a very accurate representation. And you've started to see that happening over the course of the last year or so. I know you can say 3.3%, can't complain at that. And that's true, but, there's always a but. Economists like the word but. It could be this, but it could be that. But the problem with it is it's not adjusted for inflation. When you adjust for inflation, it's only 1.3%. So we're not quite there yet. But I do believe we'll probably see real income growth coming in around the 4% mark in 2019. That's going to be a positive. We'll start shopping again, we'll become happier, and the economy can continue to grow. So big picture, what do I think for the economy? This is a quote almost directly from President Xi. President Xi Jinping said, "No one wins a trade war," and he is absolutely right. No one does. If we do not fix this, this could be the exogenous shock, the outside force that creates the recession, that drives us into a recession. So right now, we have an administration that's in a staring match with China. And I will tell you one thing, we will lose. And here's why. China's president, who by the way is now president for life, we're going to say, you know what, we're patient. China tends to take the long view. They look at the next year. We as a country work in 4-year cycles between elections, which makes sense. He doesn't have to. And because of that, a good example of this is that the first ever trade war happened in about 1720 between China and Russia. Big problems. Now, they did get it fixed after 200 years, and that's not a joke. So, do I think it will be fixed? I think it will, but it's going to be very tepid. Neither side is going to get absolutely what they want, but something will get done. And I expect that to happen probably in the next couple of months. So, hopefully that's going to be a good thing. A split Congress. So you've got the House, which is Democratic, the Senate is Republican. Is that bad? No, it's not. Historically speaking, when you have a split House and Senate, the economy outperforms. It does better than the long-term average. There's more checks and balances. It's a good place to be. So that certainly doesn't concern me. We'll probably see 2.1% growth, 1.3% employment growth. That's still about 2.7 million new jobs in the country. Unemployment rate's going to notch down a little bit. Very close, but actually will be at full employment by the end of the year, and we will see palpable wage growth. So all in all, certainly as far as 2019 and likely into early 2020, we're looking in pretty good shape. It's not spectacular growth, but neither is it contraction. So that's the US economy. What about the US housing market? Now I mentioned recessions, and recessions happen. You can buy my t-shirt, 1995, Amazon.com. But they do. I look back and looked at home prices in the US at the start of the recession and at the end of the recession to see, do recessions affect housing prices? No, they don't. What happens to housing prices? Very simple. They take a pause. They just take a stop, hang out for a while, and then start growing again. Or they notch up very marginally. Now, that was different in the last recession. Why? As we all know, housing caused the recession. And so because of that, you expected to see a fairly significant contraction in values. But even when we go through the next recession, which at some point, even if I'm wrong, it will happen at some point or another, it will not affect housing. But I'll talk more about that in a little while. We are at a generational low when it comes to inventory levels. Literally. I went back as far as, when I go back, 1999. There's less homes on the market today than there were almost 20 years ago. And at the same time, we added on almost 24 million new households. Where are they living? I'll tell you where they're living. One group are living in my basement. I have millennials. Okay, curious. All of you here, how many of you sent your kid off to college, they graduated, and then they moved back in with you again? Anyone? Every speech I give, there's always between 5 and 25 people go, God damn it, me! So you didn't do the right thing. Kid goes to college, sell house before kid comes back. So very, very low inventory levels. And it's a big problem. But at the same time, although last month's numbers were very good, sales have started to contract or level off, see some slowing down. That makes no sense. That's not intuitive. You'd have thought creating households, creating demand, housing should be thriving. But it's not, for one very simple reason. And that reason is the fact we have, as a country, reached an affordability ceiling. There must always be a relationship between incomes and home prices. End of story. It's a class I teach at University of Washington. And so but we're knocking on that ceiling right now as a country. So until what we'll end up seeing is home price growth will slow, incomes will rise, and because of that we can then start seeing increasing transactions. But right now it's a bit of a problem, certainly at the national level. Home sales will rise by about, 1% this year and 2% next year. Why the bump next year? It's a very good question. So we're seeing some modest increases, although well below the heady days that we saw back before the recession, but a modest increase. Now here's the reason why we'll see some more growth next year. It's home prices. They'll rise by just over 3.5% this year and only 2.4% in 2020. Now you can look and say, ugh, 2.5%, that's a terrible number. It's not. I've got data that goes back to 1890 on home sales in America. Home prices as a country go up by inflation. That's just what they've always done. It's what they always will do when you take the nation as a whole. And because of that, I expect inflation to be running about that 2.5% range in 2020. That's why home prices will increase by that level. So, and because you're seeing that, slower price growth, but wages rising, that means you can start seeing a pickup in transactions. However, there's two big stories for this year that I think are very important. One of which is the psychology of buyers and sellers. When was the last time we saw, think about it as the US as a whole, when was the last time we saw a balanced housing market? What year? Any ideas? None of you? Wow. 1999. Literally 20 years ago. Think about it. 2000 through 2008, the market was doing this. 2008 through 2012, it was doing this. 12 through better part of 18, it was doing this again. People have forgotten what normal looks like. And certainly from the home seller's perspective, they're saying the same thing. I pruned my rhododendron tree, my home is worth 100 grand more than the guy next door. And because that listings to the price cut are still elevated. At the same time, home buyers, we've been suffering from what's called buyer fatigue. And what's buyer fatigue? It's the fact they have been bidding for years on house after house after house and losing. And it's been a big problem for them. They're just getting tired of losing these bidding wars. And a couple of years ago, we started having that, some of you may remember this, the groveling letters that home buyers used to send to home sellers. Please choose me. The best one I saw was actually, I was giving a speech in Denver, Colorado, and it was a letter not from the would-be home buyer, but from their dog. I mean, I kid you not. It was, I love your yard. Please sell my own as your house. And I think I just threw up a bit in my throat. It literally got to that point. Now, they're starting to see some softening. They're saying, maybe it's our turn again. So they're just being a bit more thoughtful. They're not rushing after the next deal. They expect to see inventories at some point rise. So it is that move back to normality. A lot of home sellers have forgotten what that looks like. And they're in a situation, okay, we'll list on a Sunday, and we'll be reviewing offers on Friday, right? Maybe, maybe not. And so that move back to balance is, I think, again, the big story for this year, and the next couple of years, actually. There are some cheap places to live in America. No one wants to live there. So this is the percentage of households that make median income that can afford a median-priced house. So you can find a cheap house. Where's my favorite one? I've got to give a speech in Fairbanks, Alaska shortly, which I'm really not looking forward to after having been here. But there's some very, very cheap neighborhoods. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, where are the least affordable housing markets in America? What do you find in common with all of these? They're all in California, every single one. And I obviously threw in some markets down here just for perspective. Those numbers are certainly, well, I think we'll probably talk about that a bit later on, lower than I'd like to see. But we are seeing right now a migration away from California into other markets. They're going to Idaho, Washington, certainly Oregon, and to a degree Colorado. And they're moving out of these remarkably expensive. I mean, San Francisco, 6% of households can afford a medium-priced house. 6%. It's scary. So I look at markets that are going to underperform this year. LA and San Francisco, the two that worry me more than any other. They just cannot continue in that respect. So mortgage rates was mentioned earlier on by the last speaker. So what I did was break it down into decades. So in the 70s, about 9%, 80s, 12%, dropping down to 8, dropping down to 6, and the 2010s down to 4. And this is really quite remarkable. It really is. So when you think about it, mortgage rates right now are still low. This is my forecast for 30-year fixed rates over the course of the next, by quarter, 2 years. So we had a little spike end of last year. We almost hit 5%. However, wow, it's horrible. When I look at it, I ran the forecast about 9 months ago, and my forecast said that we should break 5% by the end of this year. I reran it about a month ago. It says no, we will not break 5% in terms of mortgages in 2019, nor in 2020. So I look at this and say, mortgage rates are still remarkably cheap. And they are. And almost all of us believe that. Apart from millennials. They're like, no. Where's my 3 5/8 mortgage? This is daylight robbery. It is egregious. It is a rip-off. Say the same thing to them. Sit down, grasshopper. Let me explain some things to you. Mortgage rates in 1990 were 10% and we still bought houses. Where were mortgage rates in October of 1982? 20%, 18 plus points, and we still bought houses. So the trend is going to be a very gradual rise, but still historically remarkably cheap. And because it's Maui, if I look at jumbo rates, non-conforming loan levels, it's remarkable. They are still very, very low, almost on a par with conventional mortgage rates. That's never supposed to happen, and it really isn't. It's a very unique situation. The jumbo loans are very cheap, conventional loans are also very cheap, and they're going to stay that way certainly for the next couple of years, if not longer. 1/4 of homes in America have over 50% equity. That is a massive, massive number. It really is. So we're sat on a ton of equity right now. A great place to be. And that number likely is going to continue to grow. Why? We're actually putting down far higher down payments on our houses than we ever have before. And that's kind of very common. We started seeing that back in 2012. And so when you see that occurring, then that's a good place to be. Big build-up of equity. But we're living in our homes longer. We used to move every 4 years. Now we move about every 8 years. Why is that? We're moving less for our jobs than we used to. We used to basically go, think about a new job, okay, I get a job in Kansas, kids, dog, off we go. Now we're not doing that. What we're doing is we're finding new jobs, but we're staying close to where we already live. Secondly, pre-retirees, we're retiring later in life. And we're not going to move until we retire. And even then, 2 out of 3 retirees would like to age in place. They'd like not to move. 2 reasons why they will. 1, they need the equity to live on. That makes sense. Secondly, hips and knees. I can't do those stairs anymore. Time to move on. And so it really is interesting. So and there's actually a third reason, which is not applicable yet, but it's something I'm working on a model right now. Imagine the year is 2022. And imagine mortgage rates are running about 6.5% to 7%, likely where they will be. And imagine you're sat in your house with a 3 5/8 mortgage. Are you going to move? I would argue a lot of people won't. And certainly those in the remodeling industry are very much of that opinion. And that's why the remodelers index is going parabolic right now. So I think a lot of people are saying, you know what, I'm just going to stay put. I'll do the kitchens, the bathrooms, add on a bedroom. I'm not going to move. And that's going to be a problem because it means we're not seeing the turnover of houses. And at the same time, we are not building anything like enough houses. And there's an interesting reason why that is. If you think about a home builder, there's 4 components to building a house: land, labor, materials, and regulation. Land prices, you certainly know it here, we know it on the West Coast, continue to rise. And it's becoming expensive. It's land in aggregate. Labor's a big problem. See, back in 2008, a lot of construction workers, when the recession hit, they went off, they left the industry. They went fracking. Tough thing to say this time in the morning. So a fracking they went, And off they went to the Dakotas, and they got into the oil industry. And the problem is this, they've not come back, yet no one is learning to go to, no one's going to vocational school to learn to become a plumber, a carpenter, or an electrician. I have 3 sons, 30, 28, and 14. Don't ask. Anyway, so my 14-year-old, he could not hammer a nail in straight for love nor money. He is useless. And he is. William loves speed mathematics. That's what he does. He multiplies 10-digit numbers in his head. He's a freak. Anyway, so, but if we can't find tradespeople, that's going to continue to push up labor prices. Material costs. All of a sudden, we're now implementing taxes or tariffs on aluminum, well, on steel, even on lumber. What did the Canadians ever do bad to us? All of a sudden, we implemented the Canadian softwood lumber tariff. You get charged, you have to pay more to import lumber from Canada into the US. So those costs are escalating. And finally, my favorite, regulatory fees. 24 cents of every dollar it costs to build a house are regulatory fees. Think about it. 24 cents of every dollar is regulation. Permit fees, water sewer hookup fees, entitlement fees, all these fees are massive. So imagine a situation whereby you're a builder and you put in land, labor, materials, regulatory costs, and you throw some profit in, and it will spit out a number. And let's say, depending on what market you're in, that number is $1 million. Okay. But what if the market price acceptance point is $600,000? Are you going to build it? No, you won't. And so I expect to see really not growing inventory in terms of new homes in the US this year, possibly not next year either. It'll rise, but it's not going to be rising enough to meet new household formations. That does one thing, it puts pressure on the resale housing market. Home ownership rate. This is interesting. So if you go back in time, back to 1965, 65% of us own our homes and 35% rent, and all is right with the world. But that started changing back in 1992. What happened then? President Clinton happened then. I remember I was actually at Harvard teaching back then, and it was interesting. I was sat in front of my little 20-inch TV, and President Clinton, who was then running for president, was saying, everyone has the right to own a house. And I'm sat in front of my TV going, no, they don't. But Wall Street listened to him and not to me. And that's when we started coming out with these wonderful mortgage products, my very favorite, the zero down option arm with cash back at closing. So you're going to take out a 105% mortgage, and if you can't pay your mortgage in 1 month, we'll put it on the back end of the loan. What could possibly go wrong? And he did that for 8 years. And then President Bush came along, and he said exactly the same thing, and it worked until it didn't. So we've almost hit 70% in terms of home ownership, overcorrected as we always do, but we're back up to that 65% number again. And I will argue that that number will rise through 65 into 66 and possibly 67% over the next few years. Why is that? Millennials. They are going to be buying more homes in America this year than any other age cohort, first-time buyers. Now, a lot of people were thinking back in the day, no, it's not going to happen. Millennials, they're going to want to be perma-renters. They don't want to get stuck to the same house. They're going to have 13 jobs in their careers, blah, blah, blah. No, that's not the case. And it really isn't. They will do everything that we did as a generation. They just do it 3 to 5 years later. 1 million millennial women are having babies every year. There's 79 million millennials in the country. There's a lot of them. And here's what's going to happen. They're going to get married. They're going to have babies. And they are going to move out of apartments. And here's the fun part about it. They will end up selling their $3,000 bicycles and buying a Subaru. I can't wait. Anyway, so first-time buyers are going to drive the housing market, again, a lot, certainly for the next several years. Massive demographic. So is there a housing bubble? The answer is still no. One of my jobs at Windermere is to find out bad things that could be happening in the market. Make sure our brokers are ahead of the curve in that respect. So I look, and what do I see? Credit quality is remarkably high. It's the average FICO scores on conventional mortgages. Right now, we're at just above 750. So what we've seen is a massive tightening of credit over the course of the last several years when we came out of the recession. And I know that from personal experience. I refinanced my house a couple of years ago. It was like giving blood. I mean, literally it was. I had my mortgage broker call me up and said, Matthew, yeah, why did this bank account go down in value? I'm like, I went grocery shopping. Now, I know it's Whole Foods, but come on, guys. I mean, they are very, very, very cautious. So we went from being very underqualified, I mean, literally, FICO scores of 500, no down, no credit, no nothing, to being remarkably overqualified. And that's certainly a spot we're in today. Secondly, have you heard of the Case-Shiller Index? You know, okay. Well, for those that haven't, Bob Shiller, a nice guy, friend of mine, correction, was a friend of mine. He won the Nobel Prize for Economics 2 years ago. Become a Nobel laureate, think you know everything. Became a pain in my butt after that. Anyway, so it's a repeat sales index. It looks at the sale of the same house over time. Bought in 2000, sold in 2018. What do you buy it for? What do you sell it for? What's the spread? That gets built into his index. And so you can clearly see bubble forming, bubble bursting, and look, we're way above the pre-recession peak. Well, I take his numbers and I adjust them for inflation. CPI minus shelter. What does that tell me? We're still 8% below the pre-recession peak. We can still see home prices continue to grow. And without me worrying at all, quite frankly, it's just nothing scaring me right now because of this. In addition, the value, you take the value of every home in America, it's about $26 trillion. Or if you believe Zillow, 326 trillion. Are you awake? Wow, okay. All right. Now, at the same time, we haven't been expanding mortgage debt. We've been putting down far higher down payments. So because of that, we're sat on $15.5 trillion of equity. That's huge. No one is in a situation of going negative in terms of their equity. And so I remember back in the day in 2010, 2011, giving speeches to bankers. Not a good thing to do, by the way, back then. I'm stood at a podium saying, guys, next year's going to suck worse than this year. But what people were doing were actually taking the keys to their house and mailing them back to the bank. It was called jingle mail. Literally, because they were in negative equity. They were just walking away. That is not going to happen. So it's no bubble why. Qualifying, very, very hard. Mortgage rates, still remarkably cheap. Demand, creating households, think millennials, they're out there. Wish we were building more, for the reasons I've already explained, we're not. And we've got a ton of equity, and yes, there are overvalued markets in America, that's very true. But just because they're overvalued, it does not mean that there is a bubble in place. So, before I hand off to my friend and colleague in a moment, what do I think? We are going to continue to grow. We are, I mean, I hate to use baseball analogies because I wish we could find a cricket analogy, it'd be handy, but I can't think of one. So, are we in the 8th inning? Yes, we are. So, but we're in the mature part of the cycle. We're fine this year, but I do expect to see a modest slowdown some point in 2020. Mortgage rates, yeah, I mean, I think home prices will rise, but affordability is a problem. It's a significant problem in many markets. I'd argue here is one of them. Certainly up and down the West Coast, very much so. And so when you start having affordability issues, you've got to see slower home price growth to let incomes catch up. So there's still growth, but we're going to get away from the rabid, rampant markets we saw several years ago, where many markets are seeing 8, 10, 12% price growth. Not going to work. Affordability, yeah. And I think we're hitting that ceiling, so that likely is going to have, for a period of time, an effect on transactions, just until incomes rise. And yeah, I think the move back to balance, or at least as balanced as Hawaii can get, is going to be the big story for 2020. So are we in the mature cycle economically? Yes. Are we in the mature part of the cycle from the home ownership and housing demand perspective? Probably. But the long-term prognostication, back in 2010, remember, there were some people who were saying everyone is going to be a renter. I was actually doing a CNBC TV thing with the real estate professor from the Wharton School, and she was saying at Penn, and she was saying, yeah, everyone's going to rent. Why would you buy? I'm like, that's not going to be the case. Clearly, I was right and she was wrong. So as we go forward, yeah, it's going to be robust demand. Demographic demand, absolutely. Massive generation of younger people are going to get into home ownership a bit later than we did, but they will. A move back to balance is going to be important. But what is going to be equally as important is going to be accurately pricing the houses you're selling. What's equally as important is going to be explaining a real normal market to your clients, many of whom can't remember or never saw a normal housing market. It's going to be a good year. Thank you so much for listening to me. I hope you got something out of my comments. Have a great year. Everybody.
Thank you, Matthew. Aloha. Good morning, everybody. So yesterday we were over on the Big Island, and I was able to sign out Bank of Hawaii's jacket for the day. But then I realized I hadn't worn it in 5 years, and I've added some pounds. So besides, proud of it. I was carrying a jacket around all day. Oh, humbug, right? So we'll get you an Aloha shirt next time, Matthew. I'm going to focus my comments on Maui initially, and then just because I get bored doing that, I added some stuff on tourism performance that maybe should wake you up a little, something to think about on Maui, where I'm pretty sure you're not going to build the next 10,000 lodging units. I don't know, where's Mike Victorino's person? Who's that? Hey. Who I'm finally calling Mike instead of Shane's dad. So I got scoldings from him so much last year. Okay, so Mike. So here we go. I'm going to take the big picture perspective here, but it's the big picture for Maui County. Oh, are we still on? And start with the national backdrop that Matthew was just talking about. So this is GDP for the U.S. and Hawaii for the last decade, and you can see the recession there where we drop off. The vertical line is the collapse of Lehman Brothers, and you can see how the path was structurally displaced, and now we're back on a trajectory that's not quite the historic path from. That's a regression from 1950 or something like that through 2007 was about a 2.5% growth path, and the U.S. has been on a 2.3% growth path through the end of last year. And as Matthew suggested, we've been seeing that deceleration since the middle of last year as the impulse of the tax cuts dissipate and sort of the drag of the tariffs begins to weigh upon economic prospects and investment in particular. But nevertheless, the U.S. has been growing on a path very similar to its historic path. How's this working out? I keep doing it. No? Is it all good? And but here's the thing, Hawaii hasn't been keeping up. Hawaii's had a below average performance this expansion to date, 10 years to date. And so the growth rate here has been about 1.8%, and unfortunately the laggards initially were the neighbor islands. So we have 3 data sets now available, one for Oahu, one for the Kahului, Wailuku, Lahaina, Metropolitan Statistical Area. The Kahului, Wailuku, Lahaina MSA. And this excludes the Kapa'a Micropolitan Statistical Area. I know, right? Where do they come up with these names? Oh, by the way, if you look for the data, like in the Federal Housing, Finance Administration and the Bureau of Economic Analysis, all of these, federal data sets, there is no Oahu or Honolulu. There's either urban Honolulu or sometimes there's urban Hawaii. What the hell is urban Hawaii? Like, remember the Honolulu Consumer Price Index? Now it's the urban Hawaii Consumer Price Index. So guess what, losers? Maui is a metropolitan statistical area. Keep the country, right? So you guys are in there now, and then there's Big Island and Kauai, and they smush them all together because that's basically Big Island and then 5 guys on Kauai, right? So you can see this is GDP going back a decade. You can just see the recession from the back row, right? When it goes down, that's a recession. You can see how, and what I did here was these are scaled proportionately for Oahu and Maui. And I aligned them to the peak of the cycle, which was not at the same moment, Maui's peak came a year earlier. The heavy line, right? Maui's recession was longer and deeper. So a deeper hole to dig out of. But more recently, Maui's been catching up. You can see that acceleration over the last couple of years. And unfortunately, these data cut off for 2017. We don't have anything for 2018, but of course, that was before the volcano. So we'll talk about that a little. These are growth rates instead of GDP. So again, the growth rate for the US, the GDP growth rate for Hawaii. I'm calculating this on a year-over-year basis to highlight the divergent performance over the last couple of years. So typically we use quarterly US data and measure at a compound annual rate. We take the quarterly change and compound it for 4 quarters. But this gives a little cleaner comparison between Hawaii and the nation as a whole. And again, I'm highlighting that divergence. Hawaii's not been keeping up, and it's the second time. The first time we kicked out Abercrombie, the second time we said whatever, and we re-elected Ige. So here we are. You can break down, you can decompose the Maui data into some industry stratification. So again, just for the people in the back of the room, the dark part of each bar is the contribution of what I'll call investment. It's the construction and the real estate piece of value added or gross product. And then the middle blue piece is the kind of a tourism proxy. It's transportation, accommodation, food services, and arts, entertainment, and recreation industry output growth. So I've weighted each sector's contribution to overall Maui GDP growth to highlight the strong contribution investment was making before the recession, and then of course investment was a big part of the recession, collapse of investment. And after an initial strong recovery, a less robust pattern of growth moving on through the 20-teens. And so that's kind of, that's, if the US is a Goldilocks economy that's not too hot, not too cold, Hawaii's kind of not keeping up. And that's idiosyncratic to Hawaii. That's on us. Thanks for the 25% affordable housing requirement, yo. So we got rid of that, right? Did we get rid of that? 50%. It's 50%? Whatever it was, I didn't even know what it was, and I came and I testified twice, right? I'm like, you guys lose this thing, what else? So here's kind of the, the ew news. So jobs and the unemployment rate. Not what you think. Whether you measure in terms of persons employed, and some persons have more than one job, and some persons are self-employed, right? So there's more persons employed than there are jobs occupied. But in both cases, the peak was a year ago or a couple years ago. The peak was before the volcano, which was not even on this island. I'm talking about the volcano on the Big Island, right? It's like, what the hell? It's not even, okay, it's not even on this side of the Big Island. It's on the other side of the Big Island. So that's an issue. Yes, the volcano made things worse. Yes, wacky people who think that the volcano is on all the islands chose not to come. And you can see it in the tourism data. They just stopped coming because there's a volcano in Hawaii, right? There's a war in the Middle East, right? So, and the unemployment rate, which bottomed out at the end of 2017 at 2.6% on Maui, is now up to 3.5%. So the next time, I mean, guarantee you can pick up the newspaper and it will say, U.S. unemployment at an all-time low, blah, 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 not relevant, that's the mainland, we don't live there. The unemployment rate here is rising. So that's on us, right? That's not on the administration's economic policies or the Democrat wannabes, right? Or the 50 zillion guys running for president, right? There's nothing to do with that. That's something we need to be thinking about. Now, you've had this great run. It's a tourism-led economy, so when it's doing well, everybody else is getting the spillover. And I'm going to come back to some issues related to tourism, but the fact is that on this island, in this county, on this island, whichever, you basically have the same number of rooms you've always had. Yes, there's 5 guys with an undocumented vacation rental seeking a pathway to citizenship in your subdivision, but okay, whatever. And I flew over here, so this is what happens, right? Somebody invites me over to the neighbor islands like twice a year, and every time I sit next to somebody on the airplane, like we were talking about the train, you know, on Oahu, the train, the capital T-H-E, capital T-R-A-I-N, the choo-choo train. And I sat next to the guy, Craig Hirai, one time. And he's the head of the state's housing agency, you know that one? It's like the HHHHHHFDC or something. And he was all talking about, oh yeah, brother, we own all the land at the train stations. And I'm like, yeah, so how come you're not building housing at the train stations? And whatever, we got to figure it out. So this morning, that pretty much is a summary of a half-hour conversation with Craig. So then, okay, so I'll tell you some more stories. Wait, how much time I got? So then he says, everybody, you got to come to the TOD meeting. Oh, what's that? Transit-oriented development. I'm like, hey, brother, I told this one to the mayor. When Mayor Kirk was Moofy's managing director, you remember. So go ask Kirk. I'm not lying, bro. And Kirk says, Kirk says, oh yeah, brother, you got to come to this party at Chuck Wathan's house. I'm like, oh yeah, Chuck Wathan, let's go. So I go to the party, and it's like a fundraiser. I've never been to, this is the only fundraiser I ever went to. And I was totally punked, right? Because I didn't know it was a fundraiser. So we're standing around the pool, and Kirk was going to run for mayor. And so we're talking about TOD. I said, bro, it's not TOD. So here, when you run for mayor, you got to own this, okay? This is the branding. It's not transit-oriented development. It's development-oriented transit. It's not about the freaking train. It's about where you build housing in the 21st century on Oahu, at the train station. That's where you build the malls. That's where you build the housing, bro. It's not transportation. Pfft, everybody get pickup truck, right? It's not about that. So, okay, I don't know, you guys are never going to have anything like this on Maui, but I'm just saying, right, in the 20th century, God invented affordable motor vehicular transportation, and so we all decided to live across the island, on the other side of the island, because we could drive really fast. And then nobody built any more freeways. So now we all drive really slow, and it's the space-time continuum. Yeah? Once you're an hour away from work, it's not worth it. The hour is not worth it. Except at 47th Street and 7th Avenue, okay, you know, maybe it's worth getting to Midtown Manhattan. Maybe it's worth an hour and a half to get to Midtown Manhattan, but not downtown Honolulu. So once you get to where the commute from Mililani or whatever is an hour, we're done. And people are either going to move back into the city or whatever. They're old and in the way. They're retired, so they're not even going to work anymore. So that's what's happening on Oahu now. The whole thing is moving back, right? Everybody's moving back into the city. And don't ask me how I got off on that. But that's a completely different environment from the one you have here on Maui, where you guys like chose not to have more houses, and you chose not to have more hotel rooms. And the guy I sat next to on the plane this morning was a guy who's rebuilding whatever. Is the Prince even there at Makena? Oh yeah, they scraped it. Brother, they scraped the Prince Hotel. So you got to think about this for a second. You go look. Mike and some of the old buggers told me this story. You go look at the general plan or something from 1968, right? And there's Kihei, right? For the Canadians, you get Kihei, right? And then Wailea, right? For the rich Haole buggers. And then Makena. And the road's supposed to go, right? The road that comes down to 20 miles an hour, turn right, go down the hill. It's supposed to go all the way down to Makena. And that was like 1978 or something when the Prince was built. And here it is. It's 40 years later, dude. And we're not going to do that? You know, don't tell me about, ooh, I want it to be like it used to be. Yeah, like when we used to say we were going to build McKenna. So this guy's on the plane, and he's actually building, he's going to build the units or whatever. And I said, oh, how much get? 180. You're going to build 180 units of some sort, I don't know, bungalows or something. And I'm just thinking, wow, so here's your problem. You guys are maxed out in the visitor plan. Whether you look at okay, this is the body count, the number of tourists, and constant dollar expenditure, right? So you get a body, you get money, the end. That's how we export. If we could do it without these people coming to Maui, Maui tomorrow would be stoked, right? Because what Maui tomorrow is thinking is what we call Amazon, right? We sell them something, we take their money, and they never come to our island. Right? That's the perfect export. But we don't do that in Hawaii. They have to come here. And then some genius decided to make Wailea as far from the airport as you can get without being at McKenna. So now we got to have a big-ass rental car parking structure because everybody got to drive across the island to get to Wailea. Okay, so that's the plan, and here's the problem. Once you get up, you guys run, what, 80, 85% occupancy? So then look at the room rates. And as the room rates dial up, because there's no more rooms, and all the rooms full, so it's musical chairs. So then you see the average stay length shrinking. And then you'll be in this tug of war between the properties who are happy that there are no more properties, who are doing yield management, right, to optimize their rates, and the stay length shrinkage, and everybody else who's doing, you know, some Zodiac diving tour or zip lining or some, all the other guys are duking, the Gucci handbag guys, they're all duking it out for the crumbs that are left after the lodging people get first crack, right? It's a two-part tariff. You pay to get into the amusement park, that's your airfare, then you pay to stay in the amusement park, right? That's your hotel, your lodging. That's the fixed cost. The rest is variable. So that's the strategic planning moment that Maui this decade has arrived at. And hey, I'm not from here, so you guys not going to build more rooms, that's fine. But if you're not going to build more rooms, nobody's going to add seats. Think about that one while you're waiting for Southwest to fly you inner island. I'm going to come back to some other ideas about this, but because we've all, I mean, everybody, to some degree or another, Maui's finally reached that point. Oahu got there 10 years ago, and Oahu's been in denial. And so now people are sort of realizing, oh yeah, we got to decide, we got to figure out what to do with vacation rentals, because we've just been, you know, making believe they don't exist until now. So here's home values, closer to home for most people in this audience. These are Maui single family and condo prices, courtesy of Realtors Association, who once a year ask me to dig through the data set, and I appreciate that. And I'll come back in July. The key thing here, like there's the bubble, right? This is single family and condo. And then the paths, those lines, which by the way have a slope of about 5% per annum appreciation, right? That's the long-term trend, essentially. So this is a really good picture of a bubble. In fact, there's even some overshooting to the low side at the other end. And for Maui, as Matthew kind of showed you for some of the, you know, for the U.S. as a whole and so on and so forth, you know, we sort of found our way back to the peak in nominal terms, to the last peak, but not if you adjust for inflation. We still got a little ways to go. But I mean, it's an escalator, so you're going to get there eventually, right? We lived for 30 years in a world that was full of these roller coasters. The Japan bubble, the Canadian Kihei, you know, the one in the 70s, remember that one? But in the long run, you converge to this long run trajectory. And the RAM data don't go as far back, but the Federal Housing Finance Administration data go back to pick up the Japan bubble. So we've had these 3 cycles the late 70s cycle, the late 80s, early 90s cycle, and then the most recent bubblicious subprime moment. And you can really see that strong convergence. I mean, we could break into another bubble. I'm not saying, you know, something could happen and you know, 2 million Chinese could come over here and decide to buy condos. So that would about do it. But barring some kind of demand event, the fact that your housing supply is relatively restrictive, this, you know, so far this valuation cycle, I mean, I don't even, should we even call it a cycle? It's not, right? It's converging asymptotically from below to the long run trajectory. So that's Goldilocks, like Matthew said. That's balanced, not too hot, not too, right? There's, what is there, 2 months of inventory, and supply and demand are almost perfectly matched, and you're on, you know, this blissful, like legalized Pakalolo trajectory, right? Because Hawaii wants to be the only state that hasn't, right? So here's your brain on drugs. No, this is, I wanted to focus a little bit more deeply and conceptually on the investment cycle. This is Maui's investment cycle. Oh yeah. I'm all proud because I learned how to draw in, no, I'm kidding. This is I did the math. This is 1975 and that's 2018. And you can see right at the tail end that it's kind of not had the lift that the prior cycles have had. And it looks like it's over. So let's dig into that. Here are the actual data. So these are Maui County building permits, right? Like ding, 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 ding. But if you know, now you've seen it, it's buried in there. Now you see it, it's buried in there. Right. Ready? Here. This is, I call this digital animation because I use my fingers. Oh, 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 oh. You can pass what's called a Hodrick-Prescott filter through the data. You can kind of see that this is the like chunky version. And, but as I say, if you take out this trend around this cluster of noise, and then every once in a while, right, buildings are lumpy. They get permitted 300 units at a time. So every once in a while, there's a building or a bunch of buildings. But basically, most of the noise part is clustered around a trend which has a 0.5 percentage point rate of increase per year over 50 years, 40 years, yeah? And that's what lets you pull the cycle out. So if I add this to this, I get that. I get that. Right? This I decompose into a trend. Oh, sorry, yeah. Whoa. A trend, a low order trend that's going to just kind of keep on going, and then this cycle. And the bad news is the 20 teens, it's not ranking. And it might be over. I could be wrong, right? In another 5 years, we could come back and do this again. And it turns out there's a second wind. In fact, this morning I was talking, that was my question to this contractor guy, was like, so is there a second wind? You know, is there, right? Because we're all waiting. On Oahu, it's like, you know, they rebuilt Ala Moana. So now what do you do? Because you just rebuilt Ala Moana. It's not like you're going to make another Ala Moana. You just made another Ala Moana Center. And that's sort of the problem, right? When everybody does the easy projects, then you get to 10 years out into the expansion. It's like, so now what am I going to build? What's compelling? Like what's hot on the whatever it was, the heat map or something. So it's something to think about. For housing in particular, these are the numbers of housing units authorized by building permit in Maui County. And again, so now you can do the thing in your head, right? You can see, and I'll just do it. Here's the cycle and the trend. And in this case, both of those don't look all that great. Now, your mileage may vary, and you have a new county council, so I'm sure they're all in favor of building houses, so you're good to go. Yeah? I mean, there you are. Those are the data. I got it from your county, so there you go. So, blah, 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 blah. Get a copy of the PDF from your Windermere, your favorite Windermere, the kind guy, person, and then you can read my bullet points, because I just want to come back to tourism for 2 seconds. So, here's the thing. When was this built? Were you even born when this was built? That's kind of the dilemma, right? And on this side of Black Rock, who are the brothers, right? Pleasant Hawaiian Holidays, remember those guys? And they made Royal Lahaina Resort. Have you ever stayed here? It's awesome. I haven't been here in a while, so for all I know, it's gone now. Still there. And the duplex with the bungalows, and nobody knows it's there. And bro, this is as big as all of that. It's insane. And I remember I took my kids one time, and they're all like, you know, dunking. And I was like, what are you guys doing? It's like, we're listening to the whales. I was like, what? I grew up here, I lived my whole life, I never knew you go underwater, you can listen to the whales singing. What? So, but my point here, if we're not going to do this anymore, okay, we're just going to use the old sugar mill. We're not going to build any new sugar mills. That's the sugar mill. We're just going to keep using it until it falls down, and then we'll sell it to a company that has the word Pono in it, because if it has... if it's Pono, bro, it's Pono, bro. Hey, you know. You either got to have that or like sustainable or Aina. Or sustainable Aina Pono, right? And here's the problem. This was what we did for a century. This is the visitor count going back, and I'm going to blow through this because we really do it for the money. That's like the Maui Tomorrow Amazon analogy. If we could get the money without the bodies, we would be Amazon, and we would totally do that. But it's not. It's Maui, and we do tourism. And here's the problem with the portfolio analytics. For 40 years, from 1950 to 1990, the growth statewide of real visitor expenditure, real tourism receipts, was about 13% per year, plus or minus 7.5%. Okay, so I'm now your portfolio advisor. I give you a choice. Here's a portfolio. I give you 13% per year, plus or minus 7.5%. Or you can have a portfolio that yields minus 0.1 plus or minus 8%. Take your pick. Okay, we chose the second one. Total visitor expenditure this year, adjusted for inflation, will be the same as in 1989 if we're lucky. So just think about that for a second. For 30 years, we've been busting ass, and we're making 30 years? And we're making the same amount, and we got all these guys crawling all over the damn island with some freaking app, right? And they're falling off the falls, and we got to go rescue their sorry ass with a helicopter. Right? That's what's going on. It takes 10.5 million people to get the same amount of money that we used to get from 6.5 million. Whose idea of a good deal is that? That's the over-tourism problem that people are finally... Bro, every year we'd go to the Travel and Tourism Research Association, and I would show them this chart for 30 years. And I say, no, it's not another record. Right? It's not even as much money as we made in 1989. And people are finally figuring it out, right? Because they're calling up the governor's office going, hey, brother, these people stuck on the third peak of Mount Olomana again. So more visitors, not more dollars. That was not the plan. And that's why right now, strategically, for a place like Maui, which is, this is pretty much what we do. This is what allows us to like chance it on agriculture. Good luck with that, right? If we don't right? So that I'm gonna leave you with that to think about, because right now this is my impression of the current state of tourism policy in Hawaii. And to be fair to all the right people, they've been calling us up and saying, okay, we read your paper, so now what do we do? So I'll stop there, and I think we're gonna do Q&A up here on the stage.
So we'll open it up for Q&A, and we have plenty of time. So let's start, raise of hand. I'm going to try to get the microphone around because it's hard to hear in the back. So first question, somebody. It's got to be a question. I've had 100 questions yesterday.
To your right.
Thank you.
Hey, mahalo. Thank you, Paul, Matthew. Really great presentation. Glad you guys were here. I have a two-pronged question. Which real estate sectors have the best investment potential in the next 3 to 7 years, and which offer the best protections in a downturn?
Which sectors of what?
Real estate sectors.
Oh, real estate sectors.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, okay.
What are the best real estate sectors?
Which real estate sectors will represent the best growth potential over time? Well, it's not going to be hotels, given the fact that my dear associate here seems to think we're not building any, or you're not building any. Retail is problematic. I don't see it being retail. I'm actually going to go through the list because, I mean, retail, if you look at malls per se, I think we are probably going to lose 50% of them in the next 10 years. That's not just here, that's the US as a whole. Thank you. Who has Amazon Prime accounts? That's the brilliance that is Jeff Bezos. We send him $8 billion a year for free shipping. And that's it, even if we don't spend any money. Sorry, that's an aside. Certainly residential, it does, but my concerns on residential, without a doubt, going to be based upon affordability. Self-storage, absolutely. Believe it or not. It might not sound sexy, but self-storage is good. And also industrial. With the growth here in terms of industrial spaces, warehouse distribution, you require it because you import almost everything. So I think that's a sector which is not, it's not a sexy sector, but it's one I think will do well. And land development, but the issue is, and I'm not the expert and I'll defer to Paul on this, is that I'm looking at the numbers here, and cool charts by the way, I like that, I kind of got a bit high when you were there. Is the fact that you've got growth, but you're just not building to your potential. And that's a function of over time as much as anything else. It takes so long to get permitting. You've got that cost, you're not sure what's going to happen. That's going to be the issue. So commercial office is relatively speaking positive. So those are the major asset classes. Residential, I wish you were building more. But you have the same issue that we see on the mainland in a lot of certainly coastal markets, Washington, Oregon, and California. We've limited where you can and where you cannot build. You do it on the mainland artificially by a thing called Growth Management Act. You do it non-artificially, you're an island. So there's only so far you can go. But I mean, without a doubt, I think that more supply should or would ease the issues over affordability. I'm just not sure whether you'll actually see it built. No, those are the sectors I think will be the best and worst performing ones.
The only thing I would add is that, as Matthew suggested, it's probably prudent to think a little more defensively about your exposure in real estate. And so, for example, anything that generates reasonably stable cash flows, irrespective of macroeconomic conditions, and I don't know. I'd be looking at REITs, but look. The challenge right now is that if you look at your tourism numbers right now, there's been a drop since the volcano. It doesn't make any sense at all. There's no big macroeconomic, story to, it's not the stock market or whatever. And so we're kind of scratching our heads. It's this weird thing about people not actually knowing as much about Hawaii as we think they should, and it got into their heads, and they're not coming in the numbers. And you remember a year ago this month, right, March, April, on a seasonally adjusted basis, or winter of 2018 was like all-time everything. And then the first week of May came the volcano, and boom, it just all went away. So that reveals a kind of vulnerability, which if you're thinking about commercial real estate investment or residential real estate investment, you have to take into account. We've had this really, I showed you the Maui data, we've had this really steady run of growth there hasn't been a 9/11 or one of these kind of events. The seismic event in Japan came, but it kind of dissipated really quickly in its impact, way faster than the volcano. And the volcano didn't even happen on Maui, except it happened on Maui through tourism. So that kind of vulnerability, plus the defensive posture consistent with the expectation that there might be a softer spot for the economy out over the next several years is probably a way to approach the answer to that question.
Thanks, guys. I have another question here.
Just for an informational question, I know that we have here as your co-sponsor for this event, Title Guarantee, and I know in Hawaii we use them for every and anything we do and whatever. Does every state have a title guarantee?
Yeah.
Not as good. Yeah, there are title companies everywhere. And I'm not kidding, Title Guarantee is actually amazingly good. And that's not a diss on the other ones, but these guys, I've known some of the older buggers since I was a kid, and they built a sort of a information-based company. Yeah, that was the model, long before it was fashionable to talk about the information age.
Well, another question back there.
Sorry, yeah.
Jeff Jensen with Utopian Luxury Vacation Rentals and Royal Realty. And my question is more of a general economic question. You know, we saw in 2007, 2008, the housing bubble and the burst associated with that. Seems like the banks and the lenders have gone towards more automobile-related loans, like anybody could get an automobile just by going and signing up. And then you've got student loans also that are defaulting at a fairly high rate right now. How do you see that overall affecting the credit markets and real estate?
Right. That's a great question. One, are we in a bubble relative to car loans? Absolutely we are, already. And in terms of student loans, somebody is delinquent or becoming freshly delinquent on a student loan in the US every 6 seconds. How much money do we owe the federal government on federal student loans? Anyone, any ideas? $1.5 trillion. And here's the kicker. You file bankruptcy, your credit card debt goes away. Your student loan debt doesn't. It stays with you forever or until the government chooses to forgive it. And good luck with that one. Mr. Voss is probably unlikely to do that. So it's there. The effect overall, in terms of absolute numbers, the mortgage debt is by far the largest. And so it's, whether you can see a mini bubble in cars, absolutely. My concern on student loans, quite frankly, is, I mentioned earlier, first-time buyers, a lot of millennials. I mean, if you are a 2018 graduate from a 4-year college, you are walking away with an average of $40,000 worth of debt. Average. And so they've got to address that. So they're lumbered with debt. At the same time, they want to create households and they want to buy. So, but that's going to be, I think, a significant problem. Thankfully, today, the interest rate is remarkably low. But you've also got an administration that wants to change that as well. That will not be good. But even combined, is it enough, or is it significant enough to drag us into a recession? It really isn't. So, I mean, the big kahuna? Hey, dude, I tried. In the room, mortgages, and right now, mortgage debt does not concern me. And what does, to a degree, worry me, but it's not happening yet, is the potential for banks to start easing their lending policies again and going down that road. Right now, they're not, but you do have an administration that wants to remove Dodd-Frank, Glass-Steagall. It's done all kinds of things to try and make it easier. And I'm watching that very carefully. They haven't done it yet. I mean, subprime mortgages have a place in the world, and they do, mainly for self-employed people. But in general, they're not going down that road. That's the one I would watch, because if you look at it from a perspective of student debt, that could limit demand until people pay that off. Because in addition, these kids have got a lot of loans out, but they want to buy a house. And in high rental rate markets like here, I pay the rent or I save up for a down payment. I can't do both. At the same time, the bank of mum and dad, 1-800-DAD-HELP down payment assistance program, dad's not helping anymore. Dad changed his phone number. I did. So 1 in 4 kids are still going to mum and dad in terms of help out with money to buy a home. But I don't think either of those things is significant enough to cause a US-based economic contraction. Yeah, are we in a bubble on car loans? Yes. Student loan debt, it's a long-term issue that does need to be addressed, but I don't think it's enough to actually fundamentally change or cause a contraction in the US business cycle. That's what I think.
Yeah, I would say, so I have to be careful because I got in trouble right here. Actually, it was over at the Moroccan building down the road here. And 10 years ago, it was a private client meeting, and all your Wailea clients were like complaining about how they couldn't get a loan from the bank. And I said something that Harry Eager published in the Maui News, and I got back to Honolulu, and that's when I was told I needed to retire. So, with that in mind, I'm going to be really careful with what I say. I worked in an organization with a really conservative credit culture, right? Nobody at Bank of Hawaii did subprime loans. We didn't buy any toxicity, but everybody had to go through the same hoops, and stress testing and all the regulatory changes that happened. And most of that was good from a systemic risk management standpoint, tamping down the systemic risk exposure. There were other things happening at the same time, like the diploma mills. Okay, so if you look at what's happened with student loans, government guaranteed student loans, right? There was a problem of, shall we say, Trump University, right? There were these guys that were out there. I don't want to name any, but they're gone. But there are others that are still there, and these diploma mills, and their model was, we'll put you in a loan, we'll get you a degree, and we're all good to go. And the problem is that there was that supply event meant that there were people whose degrees maybe didn't have the same market value. So think about the collateral issue. As Matthew just said, from a home lending standpoint, not only are the lending practices better, but the collateral is good to go. There's no bubble. Half of it is locked into home equity that hasn't been drained. So that part of the banking system is in really good shape. But on the student loan side, you have people, and it's a weird kind of mismatch. How old are you when you graduate? 23? How old are you when you're actually productive? 30? Right? I mean, you know how that is? You get to your 30s and, oh, this is how I actually do the work. And so the human capital formation, the collateral that was created with the way we chose to finance education, part of it was squandered, but part of it hasn't really matured into the productive phase of people's, the millennials' life cycle. And so there's this weird mismatch. I agree with Matthew. I don't think it's a systemic risk issue, but I would quickly say that we've got to find a better way to finance human capital formation, because they all have to go back to school. We all have to go back to school. That's how fast everything's changing. If you don't go back and get your professional certification every couple years, or go take some time off, and dude, the rest of the world is going to leave you behind. And that's sort of a different kind of challenge from the one you're talking about. But I think we get through the financial consequences of this okay. We have a deeper issue with respect to how we fund formation of human capital.
Any other questions?
Question in the front and over here on the stage left.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah. So I have kind of a question for each one of you, more globally or macroeconomically. I noticed you didn't talk at all about U.S. debt and also about kind of the global slowdown. So I wanted your perspective on that as far as what your projections are. And then more locally, I noticed, Paul, you had kind of slammed a little bit, I wouldn't call it a slam, but the 25% or affordable housing requirement here on Maui.
Well,
just how you might envision affordable housing impacting, or the lack of affordable housing, our economy here.
Sure. All right, so when it comes to a debt standpoint, we always tend to look at debt to GDP, the ratio between the two. Is it high? Yes, it is. Specifically, it's high. This is a question we got asked yesterday. At this point, there's bubbles there. Anyway, at this point of the business cycle, it shouldn't be there. We should be paying our bills. The economy is growing, expanding, Treasury is getting money. It should be a lot better. Could it get worse? Yes. Will it? Yes. Will it be our problem? No. It will be our kids' problem. I worry more about the budget deficit than I do anything else. And again, what we saw is changes in tax code last year. The deficit is ballooning. And certainly under the existing current administration, I don't see that changing. And that's a scary place to be. And again, given where we are doing very well productivity-wise right now. I mean, again, the last time we actually saw a budget surplus was Clinton, early 1990s. That's a long time ago. So it shouldn't be that way. But unfortunately, the way tax policy is being run right now, those deficits are going to continue. Am I worried? No. I mean, there's countries, Japan, I can name several countries, with the debt to GDP ratio is well above 100%. And so could we go towards there? I think we likely will over time. But again, that's a longer systemic problem. So it is going to be our kids' problem. But I tend to look at the budget deficit is not where it should be, given the fact we've had a solid 7 years of very good economic growth. Shouldn't be there. In terms of globally speaking, I look at China specifically, and I look at China and Japan for two reasons. They are the second and third largest owners of US debt behind us. They're still buying our treasuries. Now, if we keep on getting into these petulant, throwing the toys out the pram arguments with them, think about it. All of a sudden, China could turn around and say, we've got $1 trillion for your debt. We'll dump it. You want to see mortgage rates get back to 18% overnight? That would do it. So we need to be remarkably careful there. But globally wise, we're seeing a slowdown in global growth. Right now, the IMF have changed their forecast, dropped it down to 3% global GDP growth for 2019 from 3.3. They're understanding it. The emerging nations aren't performing. Certainly Asia is slowing down as well. We were seeing growth in concert across the globe. Now you've got the US still growing and many other countries not. Europe, well, you guys had an election. We English guys said, hold my beer. We had Brexit. So that was a big change there. So I think we're still outperforming in the US, but globally, a slowing down is certainly what I expect to see continuing. But on the debt side, I don't see it turning around, at least anytime soon.
Yeah, ironically, both questions did come up yesterday, and we actually took part of the opposite questions. But Matthew's made all the right points, and it used to be, if you surveyed economists a few months ago, the trade frictions, the trade policies were at the top of the list, and then sort of the global slowdown and political risk were a little further down the list. My impression is that it's moving in the other direction, that the global economic deceleration is coming front and center, and the risks associated with trade policy are still there, but they haven't worsened. They're sort of like on hold until we're going to see 6 more months before Brexit happens or doesn't happen, that kind of thing. Part of the problem with all of that is just the uncertainty. You just keep people twisting in the wind, and they're not going to commit to investing in productive capacity. So that's sort of on the inclusionary zoning question. Matthew referred to a broad and well-developed literature in housing economics that shows that that production quotas of the sort that we're talking about, 25%, so they're production quotas, right? 25% of what you build has to fit in this box, which is at the low end of the price distribution. And that requires that typically that a cross-subsidization occur from elsewhere in the distribution of home prices. Well, there's the high end, and then there's where the rest of us peasants live, which is in the middle. And the middle will never cross-subsidize the low end. So perversely, it only even works when there are lots of high-end trades or high-end builds among the large builders, right? Because it's you have to, I don't know, what is it on Maui, 12 units or 10 units or something? You have to be, building more than a dozen units or something like that. But it leaves out the middle. And then when the high end goes away, like in a recession, then 25% of zero is just zero. So as Matthew argued yesterday, there's a really well-developed literature, and I would just point to the U-Hero paper on it by Bonham, Burnett, and Kato. You go to U-Hero and type in inclusionary zoning, 2010, who concluded that you get less housing and you get less affordable housing. Now, what's astonishing is when you talk to the planners, They all love this stuff. And it's just like this huge disconnect. And there is an active debate going on. I was down at the legislature just a few weeks ago in one of these forums at the Capitol, and all the right people, Harrison Rue is in the TOD guy from the city, and all the bros, we all know each other, and John Whalen, the head of HCDA, right? And he was a city planning director under Frank Fossey back in the day. So he was there when the original rules were all written. And I don't know, the planners go to their conferences and they see one set of papers, and then the economists go to the ARUIA meetings, the American Real Estate and Urban Economics Association meetings, and there's a whole different literature, and we somehow are not on the same page. So, and my argument is, hey, I have a house. I'll just wait. Time is on my side, because I'm not wrong. I'll just wait, and the houses won't be built. But the second part of your question was, if I don't think a quota is a good idea because it's a quota, then what would be a good idea? Let people build the houses. So this is what I said at the Capitol 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks, or whatever it was. I started to do this yesterday, but people's heads the smoke started coming out of their ears. So a building permit is a call option on the future value of a house struck at today's construction cost. It's the right, but not the obligation to build a house. Matthew argued in the national literature that of the four components, land, materials, labor, and entitlement, let's call it, the regulatory burden of acquiring entitlement, that the latter, the regulatory burden of acquiring the right to build, is about a quarter of the cost. No, bro, it's a third in Hawaii. And it's always been a third. And I know I can cite you literature all the way back to 1990 where everybody keeps coming up with 1/3. And it's the only thing that's remediable. You can't change with public policy the cost of land, the cost of materials, the cost of labor. You can only change the cost imposed by the regulatory burden imposed on the acquisition of entitlement. So my snappy idea, which nobody will ever do, but you asked, is you put enough of it out there so that its price is zero. Where would that be? I don't care, eBay. Go stand out at Krispy Kreme and hand it out. Building entitlement, and just see what happens. Now, the flip side of that is boundaries and guardrails. Right? So what I'm talking fundamentally about is an old debate in economics between rules and discretion. And what we have today is a discretionary system where people are engaged in gatekeeping activity at the county and the State Land Use Commission, and it's become more and more tedious and cumbersome a process. And guess what? Those guys at the county, they hate it. They hate the job that they have to do. And people take years to get entitlement. I've been working with Castle and Cook, brought 20 years to build across the street from Costco on Kauka Boulevard, which has an off-ramp from the H2 freeway. Is that not obvious that it should be housing? Because I don't know what else would be. So if you have boundaries that are credibly enforced, and there's the problem, right? Whatever your zoning rules or whatever, if you have a credible enforcement threat, but you let everybody drive through whatever's permissible without all this gatekeeping, then you might get there. And when I look at Maui, I mean, okay, I'm not from here. I just fly in on the airplane, I look out the window. It seems to me that it makes sense for the Kahului-Wailuku conurbation to radiate spatially across the isthmus up to some boundary. I don't know where it is. And at some point, you get to where you go with density closer to the mall that's not going to be there in 10 years or whatever. I mean, there's other spatial micro things going on in Kahului-Wailuku, but it's already a city. So however much of Haleakala you need to protect or whatever, all the wasteland that's on the middle of Maui now, and take away the water from everybody, that'll do it. And right, you got to have a path, otherwise we have what we have now. And you saw the data, right? There's a very low production. It's been coming up, partly because the rule was dialed back, right? There was some more accommodative posture adopted by the county council about 5 years ago or something like that.
One more question.
Could you just clarify, you talked about the recent disparity between visitor arrivals and visitor revenue. Could you just clarify once again why there's that disparity growing?
So the long-term path of expenditure per person, per visitor, as well as some of the other behavior attributes, length of stay is a good example, has slowly been declining. And there are many reasons for it. One of them is that, you know, when Gidget came in 1955, the average length of stay was 25 days. The average length of stay was 25 days. You came over on the Lurleen for 5 days. You stayed at the Royal Hawaiian for 5 days. Okay, those were not the people who came when the Boeing 747 began flying in 1969. And we got mass market tourism, and all the Canadians came to the Maui Hotel in Kihei, right? And every new market, it's the same phenomenon. The first guys come and they buy Gucci bags, and then the last guys come and they're at Costco. Right? You get in your rental car, you drive out of the airport, first stop Costco, and everybody's loading up the Costco stuff for their undocumented vacation rental. So, and it's the same at Disneyland. You will never spend as much money at Disneyland as you did the first time you went and got hosed. Right? You figure out, I'm not going to do that again. So, here we are, and the average stay length is about 9 days, used to be 10 or 11 for domestic visitors, and it's 6 or used to be 7 for Japanese visitors. And why the shrinkage? Well, because we haven't built any more rooms. So you dial up the rate. How do people deal with that? They cut back on stay length. So there's a thing going on there, and then the rate's gone up, but the total spending hasn't. Do this math. Hotel lodging revenues have risen in real inflation-adjusted terms, but total expenditure measurably has not. That means something else went down. Everything else that's non-lodging had to have gone down. And this is the dilemma, because we do it for the money. Right? We don't do it because we'd like them to go up to the top of Haleakala. So that's the dilemma.
Okay, another round of applause for them. So we'll turn it over to Brad and Tom for some closing comments, but thank you for coming.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you taking the time and learning a little bit more about what's going on. I'd like to thank our speakers, and let's give them a round of applause again. Very enlightening, and if you have any questions on any of the slides, I think we'll have some of that at our disposal. You can get in touch with some of our real estate representatives. If you like the slides, reach out to us and we can get them in your hands. So thank you, and have a great day.